Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Thank you so much for joining me again today, for listening on the radio or you're listening to the podcast. Thank you very much. I want to get this out of the way because I just remembered it right here at the beginning of the show, and I will repeat it, hopefully, throughout the show. I had a listener, Ed, who emails me from time to time, Ed the Pilot. He asked if I would ever answer listener emails or questions, whether you just email them to me at, Johnny@geektherapyradio.com, or you can just go to geektherapyradio.com and hit the contact form, or you can, DM me on Twitter. So it's Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter. I think it's technically at Geek Therapy KPRC. That's the handle. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that good stuff. Any way you can kind of message me, the easiest way is the email, Johnny, JOHNNY, at geektherapyradio.com. But I would love to answer listener emails. Let me put it a better way. I will do my best to answer the questions and emails, but I will certainly respond to them, because if there's something that you ask me and I don't know about, I'm not just going to spit out, facts that aren't facts. That's not the type of radio show that I operate here. That's all I'll say about that. But I will certainly respond to questions that I get, and I would love to do that. So if you, I don't know what you would have questions about. It's just kind of things that you want me to respond to. Johnny, what do you think about the new DJI drones coming out? Johnny, what do you think about old computers, or this computer in particular? Johnny, what do you think about this car or this airplane or whatever, these speakers? I'm an audio engineer, by the way. I went to school for audio engineering. I'm an audio engineer. If you have questions about, EQ and compression and kind of making podcasts and making the best audio for your videos, ask away. I would love to answer questions like that, or about video games, cameras, anything you're geeking out about. Commodore 64s. I have a little side geek out of about fishes and fish tanks. I'm looking over here at my little, I think it's a 2.2 gallon tank. I have one fish in there that is robust and has survived, and the fish is named Percy, which is short for perseverance, because it has certainly persevered. It's some sort of guppy. I forget what kind of guppy. A panda guppy. The only other fish I've tried in there, to be honest, and maybe I've talked about this on the show, and maybe I haven't. I wanted to start a little tank, a 2.2 gallon tank, with a handful of neon tetras. Everything in my past history with neon tetras screamed at me, don't even bother trying with neon tetras. The way it works out, and anybody who's had a fish tank knows exactly what I'm talking about, a freshwater fish tank. Neon tetras look very pretty and they're very cheap, but they are made out of Fabergé. They are so unbelievably sensitive. They are inbred to death, literally. I mean, most fishes are inbred, but neon tetras are just so sensitive. They keep them in the tank, and maybe in the store, maybe they last a day or two, if not just a matter of hours. Like if you go to PetSmart, neon tetras have an attrition rate that is through the roof. I would say, and I'm being a little facetious here. I would say if you bought 100 neon tetras, 6 or 7 would survive, for a few years. Most of them would die within the first 48 hours, I'd say, no matter how well you've set up your tank, no matter how balanced the ecosystem is, no matter the temperature and pH of the water and the microbes and everything you need to have just right in the tank. Neon tetras, they're made out of glass. They're so fragile, and they are so genetically at a disadvantage. They're not purebred neon tetras. They suck. So the first and only guppy I've had in here, this panda guppy, has survived just fine. I know how to set up a fish tank reasonably well, water conditioner, all that good stuff. I know what the temperature is. I have a little, it's a small tank, so I've got a little 5 to 10 watt heater in here. Keeps that temperature at a perfect between 72 and about 82 degrees is where I keep it. Usually it's about 75. It's at a perfect 75 right now. I tend to like to keep it a little bit warmer. Anyways, I don't know how I got off on the tangent. If you wanted to ask me about fish, That's all I'm saying, is if you want to ask me about anything, computers, fish, video games, airplanes, cars, cassette tapes, CD-ROMs, Johnny at geektherapyradio.com, and I would love to respond to those questions. I will answer them the best I can, but I will certainly respond to them. So we're nearing the end of the first segment here, and there's a couple of geek things that I've got going on in my life. Right now, right behind me, I've just procured recently a Dell Latitude, was it CP laptop from, I think it's late 90s, 1998, 1999. The model number is, it's an M233 XT. So it has a Pentium 233 megahertz processor with MMX technology. I think it's got 2 megs of video RAM, 128 megs of system RAM. It's a good bridge machine, and when I got it, I have a feeling that I'm going to talk about this more in the next segment. There's a few things I want to talk about. When I got it, I wanted it to be a good bridge device. Like, I do have that Pentium 3 laptop that runs at 850 megahertz. That's, as far as vintage computing is concerned, that's pretty quick. And I wanted something like a little slower, a little bit more kind of lower end to the era, if that makes sense. So the Latitude CP, as I understand it, Dell Latitude CP was kind of a mid-grade business-esque work laptop. It doesn't have a ton of USB ports. It has one USB port, swappable disk drive and CD-ROM drive. I want to talk about that computer a little bit. So I'll start the next segment by talking about what I'm doing with that computer, what it came with, and what I'm doing to it. Geek Therapy Radio, don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. GeekTherapyRadio.com for more information. If you want to sponsor the show, it just dawned on me that either it was within give or take 2 weeks on either side, this is the 5-year anniversary of Geek Therapy Radio being on the air. I started the show in 2017, and spring of 2017 was the first time I went on the air. And we are in the spring of 2022. So I've been on the air for 5 years. Hasn't even felt like it. I keep thinking to myself, I've been on the air for a year or two. No, I've been on the air since 2017. And I haven't really tried to make the show profitable. I mean, it just, what it's been about for me is I just wanted to get on the radio. I wanted to be one of the last generation of content creators to not only be hitting the YouTube and hitting the Instagram and the social media and podcasts and all that stuff. I wanted to go old school with it too, do all that stuff, but also have a broadcast AM radio show. And as far as I know, I might be the only podcaster / YouTube content creator out there that has a legit terrestrial broadcast out of an antenna radio show to go along with all of that. So I think that's kind of pretty cool. So yeah, 5-year anniversary of that. GeekTherapyRadio.com for more information. If you want to sponsor the show, we can talk about it. I'm not bloodthirsty. I don't have that kind of killer instinct. So that's why I haven't been shopping the show around as much as I used to, because there's plenty of businesses that this show would line up with perfectly. Electronic stores, electronics repair shops, like iFixit, things like that. There's a ton of stuff that would line up perfectly for me to sponsor the show and for me to promote. But I just haven't been so hungry. So if you know of anybody, if you're a business owner, if you know a business owner or friends, and you think, like I said, I don't have that killer instinct. I'm not looking to get rich off anybody, but if it's a good, reputable business, it has good, reputation, and it's solid, and I like the products, and I try it out, and I'm all about that. Some good, honest advertising. So if you are a business that is in electronics or into computers or into audio, into like records or cassettes or repairing electronics or TVs or anything, aviation, automotive, you know what I talk about here on Geek Therapy Radio. We're all geeks about something, gaming, whatever. So if you're in a business like that, or you know somebody who's in a business like that, I'd love to talk to them. They just send them to geektherapyradio.com, or they can email me, johnny@geektherapyradio.com. I didn't know that was going to be a plug, such a long plug at the beginning of this segment, because I want to talk about the laptop that I cliffhanged you with at the end of the first segment. So I've procured this Dell Latitude CP. The technical model number is the M233XT. It's got that 233 megahertz Pentium processor with MMX technology. Does MMX stand for multimedia acceleration or multimedia accelerator? So like for videos and things. I think MMX came out around the Windows 95 era. Anyways, what I wanted this laptop to be was a good bridge device. Bridge device is basically, in my terms, and in a lot of retro computer terms, a bridge device is something that's running DOS.
You want to see your videos only terms.
Shush. Cancel. So I thought calling my Alexa the C word, not that C word, but another, I want to call her that C word sometimes too, but I thought changing her name to computer. Cancel. She recognized that too. Cancel. I thought that would save this headache, but obviously it didn't. I should just turn her off. I'm good at turning. Never mind. Let's get back to it. So this computer I got, the Pentium 233, blah, blah, blah. It's a good bridge device because it runs DOS and it has a USB port. That's my definition of a good retro computing x86, as far as I'm concerned, x86 retro computing platform, because it runs on DOS and it has an operating system that runs on top of DOS, but it also has a USB port. Granted, it's a USB 1.0 or 1.1 port, but USB is a technology that carries over all the way from the late 90s or mid 90s, or maybe even early to mid 90s, carries all the way up to current times, 2022, with USB 3.0, 3.2, 4.0, all that. The protocol still exists. So if you have a old computer that runs legacy software in DOS and has an old USB port, that means you can take a USB flash drive and transfer files easily between them. Now, I will say, it's a convenience to have a USB port on a vintage computer that still runs DOS. It is unmercifully slow if you have, giant files. So, for instance, I was transferring the Flight Simulator 98 CD from a USB flash drive. I wanted to put it on the hard drive and blah, 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 which it doesn't like to be installed on a hard drive. That's neither here nor there. But it's a 700 meg file, and 700 megs on a modern like USB 3.0 port is nothing. Seconds, if that. But on an old 1.1 port or 1.0 port, whatever this is, on this 233 megahertz computer, hours and hours and hours to transfer something that's around a gig.
For over 90 million songs on demand.
Computer,
Try Amazon.
cancel.
Canceling.
That's going to get real old real fast. So the USB port, it's really great to have on your computing device. She didn't recognize that. So it's good for like, if you want to type up documents in like Word 97 is what I like to do. I like to put Microsoft Office on these old machines and then type on these nice kind of old Dell keyboards and then take the files and put them wherever I want, upload them to Dropbox later on. But I save everything I'm working on the USB stick. So that's a good bridge device. I can type on my 1998 or 1999 Dell Latitude and then take the files and pop them into modern Microsoft Word and do whatever I need to from there. A good bridge device. There's a lot of software that you can run through emulation. So specifically I'm talking about old Microsoft DOS software, mainly video games. The only way you can run some of this old software, a lot of this old DOS software, is through emulation. Specifically, it's a piece of software called DOSBox. And that allows you to basically make a virtual C drive. You make a folder somewhere on your computer and just title it, C. Put all your DOS stuff in there. Configure DOSBox to look to that folder that acts as the C drive, and then you can type in whatever you want. Old school DOS, CD space, games. And then you're in the games folder, CD space, Doom. Now you're in the Doom folder. Type DOOM, and then you run that executable, and you're playing Doom. That's how DOSBox works. It emulates actual DOS. But there's some stuff that just runs better on real hardware without emulation, and that's one reason why I like these bridge devices. This computer, cancel. This device is running a Pentium 233. It's got DOS and Windows 98 2nd edition on it. So I can take games, DOS games, and run them natively on that hardware perfectly without any potential for incompatibility. I should say this. It's got its highest chances of compatibility running on original hardware. So not even using DOSBox. So that's what I have the computer for. As the segment kind of wraps up here, I've made, really one upgrade, and I want to talk about how I did that briefly. Colin from This Does Not Compute recently did a new retro computer build. Cancel. And cancel. Golly, that's annoying. This is probably the most annoying segment I've ever done. I'll talk about the upgrades I've done to my computational device here in a moment. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Don't go anywhere. Sorry for all the computer stuff. Cancel. Computer. Cancel. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I've been talking about this old computer that I've picked up. Don't worry, I've disabled my Alexa. The computer is no longer a wake word at the moment because she's turned off. So I got this old computer. To recap, if you're just joining the show, it's a Pentium 233 megahertz with MMX technology. It's got 128 megs of RAM, and I think the video memory is 2 megabytes. It runs Windows 98 2nd edition on top of DOS. I got it because it's a good bridge device, and a quick recap of what a bridge device is, at least in my terms. It's a legacy x86 computer that runs DOS, or runs an operating system on top of DOS, that has one of the first generation USB ports. That's a good bridge device because modern computers, all the way up here in the 21st century, 2022 as of recording, still have USB ports, so that now you can take files and documents back and forth from this old retro piece of technology, this old computer, and have it transfer files seamlessly with modern devices in 2022. So a legacy computer with a USB port running DOS, so that the USB port can transfer files to modern PCs. That's a bridge device. So the upgrades I've done to it, and it's really only one upgrade that I can really think about. And I was prefacing this before I got cut off at the end of the last segment by saying Colin from This Does Not Compute recently put up a video building a new retro PC. I forget what processor he put in there. Was it a Pentium 2? Was it a Pentium 2? And I think he was installing Windows 95, if I'm not mistaken. I have to go back and look at that. But anyways, that's kind of the vintage. Or maybe he was doing an XP. I forget what he was installing on there. It was kind of late 90s, early 2000s era computer, which in his opinion was a good sweet spot right now for retro computing. And I would agree. So he built it with a new old stock hard drive. He was attempting to do it with a new old stock power supply. I think it wound up not working, the power supply, and you really don't want to risk like running an old power supply. He tested the power supply, but I think he had some issues with it. anyway, so he was trying to keep it as original as humanly possible, which I understand and respect. And of course, that's what he was going for. And that was the whole adventure, is that can you use new old stock parts to build a new quote unquote retro PC? And for the most part, he could. It's a cool video. Go check it out. So I commented on there that I love this idea of building new quote-unquote retro PCs. I've done it myself once or twice, of various vintage. But I said there's one concession that I would give up in the sake of authenticity. You know, I would throw authenticity in this one area out the door for a little bit of more modern convenience. And that is the hard drive. So the computer that I have, this Dell Latitude CP, model number M233XT, came with a 30 gig, I think it was a 30 gig, IDE hard drive. And in these Dell Latitudes, the awesome thing is that these hard drives are swappable. They're not hot swappable, obviously, but they are easily changed out. So the first thing I did with this computer before, I turned it on, made sure everything worked, whatever. It had come with Windows NT. No. Windows 2000 on it, which I didn't like because Windows 2000 is running NTFS file system and it's not running on top of DOS. It's after Windows 98, operating systems stopped. Does me run on top of DOS? I forget. Somewhere around that era, Windows stopped running on top of DOS, meaning that there was no DOS anymore on the computer. So if you're running Windows 2000, you can't restart to MS-DOS because there's no MS-DOS there. The best thing Windows 2000 and beyond do is that it gives you kind of a command prompt, but it's not really DOS. So this computer, this old Dell Latitude CP, had Windows 2000 on it. I didn't like that. I wanted to put Windows 98 on it so I could have a DOS computer with Windows 98 running on top of it. So I got rid of the hard drive, and here's the modern concession I was talking about. I am all about, for the most part, for a computer that I'm going to use relatively day-to-day, not really day-to-day, but fairly often, I'm going to swap in a solid-state drive where I can and when I can. So this Dell Latitude from the late 90s that came with the standard, 40-pin or 44-pin, is it 40 or 44-pin? IDE hard drive. I went on to Amazon and picked up a 40 gigabyte IDE solid state drive and installed Windows 98 onto it. Now it boots much faster. The operating system is much more snappy. It is completely silent. Other than like if it gets too hot, then the power supply fan will kind of come on very quietly. But old computers, that constant whine and ticking you heard was the hard drive just constantly going. They were loud hard drives back then. And it wasn't just about the noise. It was, again, about that speed and that transfer rate and the data rate. I wanted a solid-state drive, so I upgraded to a 40 gig IDE solid-state drive, installed Windows 98 SE on it. And, of course, with that, Microsoft DOS. So the difference in snappiness of the system, because obviously it's bottlenecked by the 233 megahertz processor, but like you wouldn't think, with vintage computers, the bottleneck wasn't really the processor. Like if you're talking about a traditional spinning optical disc or magnetic, whatever, hard drive, spinning disc hard drive, and a processor and then the RAM, the bottleneck of old systems is the storage by a long shot. So it wasn't a 233 megahertz that was a bottleneck for the system, really, as far as day-to-day kind of snappy use. It was that the hard drive spins at 4,200 RPM. It's an IDE interface. I don't think it's even Ultra DMA. Maybe it is. It's just not great transfer rates. And even if the transfer rate is pretty decent, it's like 10 megabytes per second, 30 megabytes per second, something like that. What cripples old hard drives, spinning disk hard drives, is that those little burst files, so like those 4K files, those 4K 64 thirds files, those little tiny files that are constantly being swapped back and forth by the operating system, that's what really slows down your experience using a vintage computer running Windows 3.1, 95, 98, what have you. It's those little tiny files, thousands of them being just transferred back and forth. That's what really hangs up the system. And that's where the IDE solid-state drives shine, is those little quick file transfers of small files, those thousands and thousands of little tiny 4 kilobyte and below or whatever file transfers that happen thousands of times per second or minute or whatever is nothing for a solid-state drive. And that's why the system is nice and snappy. You still get the transfer rate of, I forget what it was, like 30 megabytes a second or whatever, sequential read and write from the solid-state drive. But as opposed to the 4K little swapping files, those transfer rates being measured in probably bytes, maybe low kilobytes, if that. Now you're measuring that in megabytes as well. So those quick transfers happening in a blink of an eye on a solid-state drive compared to a traditional optical spinning disk. Also, another reason why I swap in solid-state drives into vintage computers where I can is that I think Clint from LGR talked about this. I need to get Clint or 8-Bit Guy or Colin back on the show soon. Maybe someone else too. The reason why you swap in solid-state drives isn't just for kind of ease of use, in modern times. It's also to preserve the old optical hard drives. There's a finite amount of hours that those things will run, and if you're talking about a hard drive that came out in the 90s or even 80s, you want to kind of preserve them, because there might come a time where you want to build an authentic system using an authentic hard drive for some sort of demonstration purpose or museum purpose, and you don't want to be using an old 40-year-old optical disc day to day. So swap in the hard drive or swap in the IDE to compact flash solution. You can do that all day long. So that's one reason why I swapped the hard drive. Maybe in the few minutes I have remaining in this segment, I'll talk about the nightmare of installing Windows 98 to the IDE solid-state drive. It wasn't simply a matter of putting in the unformatted IDE solid-state drive and then installing Windows 98 off a CD-ROM. It wasn't that easy, at least not in this Dell Latitude CP's case. What I had to do was I put the IDE hard drive in that Pentium 3 computer and installed Windows 98 onto the IDE hard drive using that Pentium 3 computer. Then I took the solid-state drive out of there and put it into this 233 megahertz Pentium 1 or 2 computer, and it had to, install all the new drivers for this older Dell. That's the roundabout way I had to do it. The old Dell could not write the file. It just really did not like that it was not an optical drive in there. So that was the kind of roundabout way I did it. Installed 98 on a separate machine, took out the solid-state drive, put it in the older machine, and reinstalled drivers as needed. Dell still supports these systems on their website. That's crazy. I'll talk about that for a second. Geek Therapy Radio, don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the last segment of Geek Therapy Radio for this week. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger here, geektherapyradio.com for more information. Send me your questions there, geektherapyradio.com, or just email me directly, johnny@geektherapyradio.com, and I would love to respond to your queries on air. I would love to do that on air and here in the podcast. Grab the podcast in your favorite podcast app, Spreaker, the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, anywhere you find podcasts. Type in Geek Therapy Radio and look for the red, white, and black color scheme. Same thing for YouTube, same thing for all social media. Geek Therapy Radio, red, white, and black color scheme. If you want to sponsor the show also, you can contact me through any of those avenues. And of course, again, the email, Johnny, JOHNNY, @geektherapyradio.com. So what was I talking about the last segment? I was talking about my old computer and installing Windows 98 second edition on a solid-state drive inside this retro computer. And I ended the segment by saying, in the roundabout way, I had to install Windows 98 on the solid-state drive, which, to recap, was to use a more modern Pentium 3 laptop install Windows 98 on the solid state drive using that, then take the solid state drive out and put it into my older Pentium 1 or 2 Dell Latitude and reinstall drivers, which brought me to the point that Dell still supports these old machines. It's freaking crazy. Dell still has drivers on their website. This is like a huge shout out to Dell. You can go, if you have a computer even older than mine, even older than the one that's sitting behind me running Flight Simulator 98, as my Cessna sits there idling on the taxiway of Houston Intercontinental Airport, which is what it was at the time. It wasn't even Bush Intercontinental when Windows 98, or when Flight Simulator 98 came out. But I'm just saying, if you have an old computer like that, you come across one at Goodwill or some estate find or whatever, you found a 133 megahertz Dell whatever running Windows 95 or even Windows like 3.1, a slightly older machine, go into Dell's website. You can find all the drivers, everything you need for that old system. I went to Dell's website and put in the model number M233XT, and it's like, what operating system are you using? Anything, all the options from like Windows 3.1 all the way to like Windows 10 or whatever, which obviously the old system doesn't run Windows 10 and couldn't even hope to. But I'm running Windows 98 SE on this Dell Latitude CP M233 XT. Boom, there's all the drivers. What drivers do you need? Here's the audio drivers for that. Here's the video drivers. Here's new BIOS. I upgraded the BIOS from A12 to A16. Like, this computer hasn't been in production for, when was it? I'm going to say over 20 years. Probably 22, 23, 24 years, something, this computer. And Dell still has drivers for it. It's like, yo, what do you need? You running Windows 95 on this biatch? Here's some video drivers for you for this machine. If you have a USB floppy drive, just pop them onto there and bring them on over and install. That's what I did. Luckily, my vintage machine also has a swappable floppy bay, or I'll just call it an expansion bay. You can put whatever you want in it. You can put an extra battery in there. You can put a floppy drive in there or a CD-ROM. I put all the drivers onto a CD-ROM and then brought them over to the old Dell and copied all those drivers onto the C drive into a folder. And then I swapped out the CD-ROM drive for the floppy drive because some of these drivers require you to format floppies and reboot and boot from floppies, blah, blah, blah. Point is, I got all the drivers I needed to get this machine up and running. Everything but the USB driver. I had to go online and I just typed in Windows 98 USB driver, and there's like a better version of it that was made in like 2012, which is higher compatibility. When you're installing drivers on these old machines, like even though Dell in this case does support it, sometimes the drivers, they may not be great. Everything worked for me other than the USB. So I had to find the USB driver separately. Installed it lickety-split with a floppy disk. No problem at all. So that's my retro computing story right now. What I want to see is, so what I record this podcast with and radio show is a program called Reaper. I used to use Cakewalk Sonar. Sometimes I use Pro Tools. I've been certified in Pro Tools as an audio engineer, but I don't prefer Pro Tools most of the time. I use Cakewalk Sonar, and more recently I've been using Reaper. Reaper is free. You can use it as long as you want, fully unlocked for free as long as you want. It will just ask you, hey, if you're done evaluating, are you still evaluating? It's kind of like a WinZip situation with Reaper. Yeah, I'm still evaluating. Get out of here. You just have to answer a dialogue. But the full kit and caboodle is $60. And after you use Reaper, in my case, if you use Reaper a lot, you're like, this is... Cakewalk Sonar costs... What did I spend on Cakewalk Sonar back in the day? $600? Something like that? Pro Tools, a similar price, hundreds of dollars for the software, which is not outrageous. Software can cost a lot of money. Reaper does everything that Pro Tools and Cakewalk can and more. GarageBand, all that stuff, and it costs $60. It's open source, and it's amazing. So basically, like for Reaper, this sounds like an ad for Reaper. Basically, if you use Pro Tools, you use Cakewalk, you use what am I blanking out on? on Mac. Not GarageBand, but the big boy version of GarageBand, which I'm blanking out on for some reason. It's not Final Cut, that's video. But anyways, whatever DAW you use, Audacity, which I understand Audacity's free and it's popular, but I freaking hate Audacity. Audacity is like just a bigger version of like the sound recorder that came on Windows 95 and 98 and Windows 3.1. I hate Audacity, but a lot of people use it. There are radio hosts on this station that use Audacity to make their shows. It doesn't have nearly enough. I can't do real-time effects and plugins and adjust compressors in real time. I can't do that with Audacity. Maybe that's changed now, but you can with Reaper. I'm just saying, any DAW that you use, digital audio workstation, Pro Tools, Cakewalk, whatever, Reaper fixes your gripes. Like if you have a gripe about Pro Tools, I wish Pro Tools did this, or I wish Sonar does that. Reaper does do that since it's open source by audio engineers and DAW users. It's like, man, I wish Pro Tools did this, so I'm going to make Reaper do this. And if somebody writes it in the code for Reaper and they update it, and boom, Reaper can do it. Handy dandy. So I use Reaper. I want to see if I can get Reaper to run on Windows 98 SE, because you can download still a 32-bit version of Reaper. You're going to be under all the limitations that 32-bit brings, 4 gigabyte files, all that kind of stuff, which, unless it's a gigantic session, like gigantic multi-track session, 4 gigabytes file sizes still should be fine. And you're using separate audio segments anyways. Like it shouldn't be that big of a hindrance. It'll limit you how much RAM you can use, but I've got 128 megs in this Windows 98 machine, so I might be able to run like one plugin. I could run a compressor and an EQ, and that's pretty much all I need, and maybe a limiter on the master output. We'll see if I can even get Reaper to work on Windows 98. That's probably exactly what I'm going to do when I get off the air here, if my son stays asleep, is see if I can install Reaper onto Windows 98, 32-bit version. DJI Mini 3, the last rumors we heard, I said that, I theorized that the price was going to be around $500. The latest rumors are that the prices is going to be in between $900 to like $1,250, depending on what version of the Mini 3 Pro you get. One that comes with a new smart controller and one that comes with a basic controller. $900 for the basic version to like $1,200 if you comes with a smart controller. I don't know about all that. I hope that's not true, but we'll see. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio, and I'll see you next time, or talk to you next time. Peace. If you'd like to sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, just go to geektherapyradio.com and let's talk.